Hello and welcome to Maximum 50 Cent, the first talking book about the rapper. It was written and researched by Ben Graham, music is by Amanda Thompson, and it is read by Sean Jones. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk.
When you think about it, like they go, oh my God, like I shot 9 times. I got shot all over the place. A bunch of leg shots, but I got shot in my hand. It's not that bad, you know. It hurts more when you wake up. The doctor tells you, you haven't suffered any shots that, like, he's gonna be okay.
Thursday, the 24th of May 2000. Spring in Brooklyn. All across this New York borough, there are new signs of new life. Leaves on the trees, flowers in the park, sunlight shining on open block windows as funky hip-hop music blasts forth as ever in celebration of having made it through another winter. Yes, life is everywhere. But down in Brooklyn, death is never far away either. In the district of Queens, Curtis Jackson is sat in the back seat of his friend's black Dodge Stratus automobile, parked outside the front porch of his grandmother's house. It's just gone 11:20 in the morning, and the pair are on their way to a local tattoo parlour before returning to the recording studio, where Jackson has some more work to do. Many things may have been going through this 23-year-old's mind. The design of his next tattoo, the album he'd just recently finished recording for Columbia, his up-and-coming guest spots and promotional schedule, or loving thoughts of Marquise, his baby son. The last thing he expected here in the neighbourhood he grew up in, where he felt most safe, was an attempt on his life. Jackson's friend had come in to pick him up from his grandparents' place, but when Curtis got in, he was reminded that he was meant to be bringing down some of his jewellery. He went back for the gold, and when he climbed back into the car, another vehicle pulled up behind them. One man sneaked out, came right up on Jackson's left side and fired multiple rounds from a 9mm pistol at close range into him. Curtis was hit 9 times, including a bullet that entered through his left cheek, knocked out a tooth and then exited through his lower jaw. Others hit his hand, chest, legs and hip. But despite this, he never even lost consciousness. He was up and talking the whole way as he was driven to hospital, only stopping briefly en route so the pair could get rid of their own unlicensed gun. People say that at the time you get shot, you don't actually feel it. It's only afterwards, when the body recovers from the shock, the adrenaline wears off and you start to heal, that the pain kicks in. Jackson knew what it was going to be like. He'd been shot and stabbed before. These were the hazards of the life he'd always lived. Dealing crack from the age of 12, the streets were his education. You did what you had to do to get by, and you knew what the other guy was going to do to you if you gave him half the chance. It was the law of the jungle, and morality was a luxury you just couldn't afford. Curtis was in hospital for 13 days before discharging himself and walking out on a Zimmer frame. It took him 6 weeks to walk unaided. By this time, the man who pulled the trigger was dead himself, a victim of the same jungle law. These things happen. He did it right, he just didn't finish, Jackson said of the assassination attempt. And every cat in the jungle knows if you're going to do something, you better make sure you succeed. Otherwise, you're going to die trying. Columbia Records, though, just didn't get it. They'd signed Jackson as a rap artist on the strength of the demos he'd recorded with Run DMC's Jam Master Jay. He'd recorded a whole album for them, including their notorious underground single, How to Rob. But as soon as they heard of the shooting, they dropped him, left him high and dry. It hurt worse than the bullets. Columbia liked the gangster image. That was money in the bank. But this was too real. This was 50 Cent. I don't go to the library to find a book to figure out who I am as an artist, 50 Cent has said. I know who I am. Less than 3 years after he was dropped by Columbia, 50 had the #1 album on the American charts. He knew himself and he knew what he could do. No self-delusion, no play acting, no doubts, no regrets and no apologies. He didn't ask for the choices he was given, and he was given precious few, but the choices he made with all his might. When he decided he was going to be a hip-hop star, he went out and did it, and no one was going to stop him.
My mother was out a lot because she was in the streets, so she substituted finances for time. My mom's passed when I was like 8 years old, and she got killed. And she used to hustle, and I never knew my father, so I ended up staying with my grandparents.
Curtis Jackson was born on July the 6th, 1976, on Jamaica, Queens' notorious South Side. It was a rough neighbourhood, a proving ground for all the wannabe hustlers, dealers and bad boys, and a place to dump the bodies. If you wanted to make it on the streets, you started out by selling crack in Jamaica, where life was cheap and business was ruthless. And if you were hot, you got out of there as soon as you could. Drugs and guns were everywhere, and the law was a joke. The gangs and the dealers ran the hood like their playground, and everybody else played along or tried to keep out of their way. Curtis's mother was 15-year-old Sabrina Jackson. She was only a kid, but she was down with the gangs and did what it took to get by. Mainly, she sold coke, and she did well. She made a lot of money and was well known around the area. She let her parents take care of her baby while she was out working the streets. But when she did see Curtis, she assuaged her guilt by always bringing presents. She substituted finances for time, 50 said. She put jewellery on me early. Sabrina was tough, hard and independent. Anybody crossed her and they knew about it, and she made as many enemies as friends. But all she ever wanted to do was to look after herself and her baby boy. Curtis never knew who his father was, and never wanted to. As far as he was concerned, no man ever did his mother any favours, and eventually one of them killed her. Curtis was 8, and his mother was 23 when she went home with some guy who slipped a drug in her drink that knocked her out. Then he closed all the windows of her apartment, turned on the gas and left her to die. She was found several days later, her body all messed up and atrophied. Her killer was never found. Curtis was now left permanently in his grandparents' care, or so they thought. In fact, the streets were intent on claiming him as one of their own. Sabrina was one of them after all, and Curtis was her boy. Some of the dealers even thought that they had a responsibility to look out for him, and their way of doing that was to give him a 3.5-gram bag of cocaine to start him on his way to a career as a full-time hustler. He was 12 years old when he began selling, hanging out on the corner of New York Avenue, an infamous dealing strip, now renamed Guy R. Brewster Boulevard, between 3 and 6 every afternoon, when his grandparents thought that he was attending an after-school programme. On the corner, he quickly developed a hard-boiled street kid persona appropriate to his role. But as soon as he got back home, he switched back to the sweet, studious Curtis Jackson that his grandparents thought they knew. Once I get in the house, I'm my grandmother's baby boy. But once I'm outside, I do whatever I gotta do to get by, 50 later said. Just as he'd learnt to bury his grief, confusion and fear at his mother's murder deep inside, and to channel his rage into survival on the streets, so in his early teens he developed what amounted to almost a split personality. It was all about front. Inside he was who he was, but that was his business. On the outside he'd project whatever side of him was needed at that time and place. I know I gotta be able to separate in order to progress, he said. He could call on a confidence that seemed almost unlimited, or turn on the charm in an instant, be the innocent sweetheart or the icy, impenetrable embodiment of your worst nightmare. In a sense, it was the beginning of his career in show business. He knew himself and he knew what he could do. Everything was under control.
got arrested going into school. You know, because I started hustling when I was like 12 years old. I was hiding everything. See, because my grandmother, what happened was when I was living with my grandparents, she had 9 kids. They came up with sneakers cost like $10. She was trying to provide the things that my mother had, like pick up where my mom's left off, so her kids feel like I was spoiled.
50 Cent was arrested for the first time while in 10th grade at high school for unlawful possession of a firearm and crack cocaine. He was neither surprised nor scared. From his mother and his acquaintances on the block, he knew how the American legal system worked from a street level. He knew that he was bound to get busted eventually, but he knew too that as a juvenile he'd get probation for his first offence. He was transferred to another school, but it had been a long time since he'd attended classes regularly, and he dropped out completely at the end of the year. He treated school as a fashion show, only bothering to show up when he had some new flash threads he wanted to show off. He was always acting crazy, turning up with mad amounts of money and guns, waving it all around and being outrageous. The only class he paid any attention in was boxing, and by the time he dropped out, he was good enough to have competed professionally if he wanted. But the lure of the hustle and the money he could make was too great. 50 was determined to do whatever he had to make that money. It was his overriding obsession. Growing up without finances, it seemed like if only he could make bank, it would be the answer to all of his problems. And if making bank required robbery, violence or dealing drugs, then so be it. By the time he was 18, 50 was making $5,000 a day from selling crack and heroin, and owned both a Land Cruiser Jeep and a Mercedes-Benz 400 SE, both as white as the rocks that bought them. He ran the local strip, had his own crack house, and was known and feared throughout Queens. In his mind, he was making it. He was big time. But prison was still his second home. There was no way out but down. But if 50 knew this, then he didn't think about it too much. As far as he knew, there was no way out, period. It didn't seem like one of the options, it seemed like the only option, he later said of his life of crime. He didn't see anyone in his neighbourhood who made it any other way. Teachers told them to stay in school, work hard, and someday you'll own your own home, your own car. But it never happened. Meanwhile, guys are out there hustling, they got the car, the women, the clothes and the respect, and the kids who stayed in school are getting ripped off and left behind. For 50, it seemed simple. You got to take care of yourself, nobody else is going to do it for you, and none of their promises mean anything. You want what the other guys got, you take it and then you watch your back so no one can take it off you. You provide for yourself by any means necessary. For example, one time 50 hooked up with a gang of thieves in Brooklyn and employed them to rob his rival dealers. They stole their drugs and gave them to him and kept whatever else they took as commission. When people came to buy crack off 50, they got the stolen drugs as a free bonus, so increasing 50's share of the market and forcing his competitors to carry guns to protect themselves from being robbed again. This meant they couldn't risk being stopped by the cops, so they were always splitting. 50, on the other hand, was always there, down on the corner selling his wares as cool as ice. Consistency is the key to all success, he said. If you can consistently sell crack without the cops coming, you're going to be successful. If you consistently put out quality material in your mixtape, it'll build anticipation for your album. But eventually, even 50 could see that all of this hustling was a one-way street. In the summer of 1994, he was arrested twice in 3 weeks. In addition, there'd been stabbings, shootings, people dying all around. Death or prison were the only ways out, unless you raised your game.